I ruined my relationship by complaining about our sex life to my friends, and honestly, everyone's acting like I committed some unforgivable crime when all I did was tell the truth. My fiancé didn't just break up with me, he packed his entire life and disappeared within 48 hours, and now our mutual friends are treating me like I'm the villain in a story I never meant to create. The thing is, people think they know what happened based on the gossip circulating through our friend group, but they're missing the context that explains everything. They see a woman who humiliated her partner and drove him away, not someone who was drowning in a relationship where intimacy had become a source of genuine distress and confusion. I'm scared that if I don't explain how this actually unfolded, I'll be defined forever by the worst moment of my life, the moment when my private frustration became public devastation. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, including the part I haven't admitted to anyone yet, the real reason I said what I said that night. Because once you understand the full picture, you might still think I'm in the wrong, but at least you'll know why I made the choices I made. Ryan and I had been together for 4 years when this happened, engaged for 6 months. From the outside, we looked perfect. He was thoughtful in ways that my friends envied, surprise coffee deliveries to my office, remembering which podcasts I mentioned wanting to listen to, planning weekend trips to small towns with used bookstores because he knew I loved them. We rarely fought. Our friends joked that we were relationship goals, which always made me smile even though the phrase was click D. The intimacy problems started gradually, maybe 8 months before everything fell apart. At first, I told myself it was normal, relationships evolve, passion fades into something more comfortable. But it wasn't just frequency that declined. When we were together physically, something felt fundamentally off. Ryan seemed distracted, mechanical. He'd finish quickly, then roll over and fall asleep while I lay there feeling confused and increasingly inadequate. I tried addressing it delicately. Hey, maybe we could try slowing down. Or, I read this article about couples reconnecting through. He'd agree enthusiastically, we'd have one slightly better encounter, then slip right back into the same pattern. I started Googling things at 2 in the morning: partner not engaged during sex, how to tell boyfriend you're unsatisfied, is bad sex a reason to end engagement? The real issue, I thought, was communication. We just needed to talk more openly. So I tried being more direct, suggesting we see a couples therapist who specialized in intimacy. Ryan got defensive. There's nothing wrong with us, he said. You're overthinking things. That response made me feel like I was being unreasonable, like my needs were excessive. I started confiding in my best friend Lauren, just small comments at first. Things with Ryan are a little off lately. She was understanding, asked gentle questions. I appreciated having someone validate that my frustration was legitimate, that wanting a fulfilling physical relationship with my fiancé wasn't selfish. But here's the first thing I haven't admitted: those conversations with Lauren felt good in a way that scared me. Every time I voiced my dissatisfaction, it became more real, more justified. I started looking forward to our coffee dates where I could vent about my relationship problems. It became a pattern. Something would happen with Ryan, I'd feel disappointed, then I'd mentally catalog it to discuss with Lauren later. I was building a case against him without realizing it. The girls' night happened on a Friday in late September. Lauren was hosting at her apartment, just her, me, and 3 other close friends: Becca, Morgan, and Jess. We'd been drinking wine for a couple hours, playing this card game where you draw questions and everyone has to answer honestly. Stupid, harmless fun, until someone drew the card, rate your partner in bed on a scale of 1 to 10. Everyone laughed. Becca went first, giving her boyfriend a 7 with this elaborate explanation about how he was enthusiastic but needed navigation. Morgan gave her husband an 8, Jess gave her new girlfriend a 9. They were all joking, exaggerating for comedic effect. Then it was my turn. I could have laughed it off, could have given some vague middle number and moved on. But I'd had 3 glasses of wine and I was tired, so tired of pretending everything was fine, of protecting Ryan's ego while my own needs went unmet. Honestly, like a 4, I said. Maybe a 4.5 if I'm being generous. The room went quiet for a second, then Lauren said, "Oh shit, really?" And suddenly everyone was leaning in because my relationship was supposed to be the good one, the stable one they all envied. I should have stopped there, changed the subject, made a joke, anything. But the wine and the attention and months of accumulated frustration pushed me forward. He just doesn't put in effort anymore. It's like he's following a checklist. Foreplay check, but only the bare minimum. Main event over in like 5 minutes. My needs completely ignored. Then he falls asleep and I'm lying there wondering if this is really what I signed up for forever. They were sympathetic, supportive, asked questions. I answered them, getting more specific, more detailed. I told them about the time I tried initiating with lingerie he'd once said he loved, and he seemed almost annoyed by the effort. About how I'd suggested watching something together to get ideas, and he'd acted like I was perverted. About how I'd started faking it just to get things over with faster. I was on a roll, finally unburdening myself to people who understood, who validated my disappointment. What I didn't know was that Ryan had come to pick me up early. He texted that he was outside. I didn't hear my phone, so he came to the door. Lauren's apartment is small, and we were in the living room maybe 15 feet from the entrance. When she opened the door, I was mid-sentence, describing in unflattering detail our most recent encounter. I saw his face in the doorway, and my entire body went cold. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse, devastation mixed with betrayal, like he was watching someone he thought he knew transform into a stranger. We made eye contact for maybe 3 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Then he turned and walked away. I jumped up, ran after him, but he was already down the stairs. "Ryan, wait," I shouted down the stairwell. He didn't stop, didn't even slow down. I stood there in my socks on the landing, my heart hammering, while my friends clustered awkwardly behind me. "I'm sure he'll understand once you explain," Lauren said, but her voice was uncertain. I called him 6 times on the way home in my Uber, straight to voicemail every time. When I got to our apartment, the place we'd moved into together after getting engaged, the place where we'd picked out furniture and argued playfully about throw pillow arrangements, his car wasn't there. I let myself in, expecting to find him packing or furious or crying. But the apartment was empty. Over the next hour, I sent probably 20 texts, apologizing, explaining, begging him to come home so we could talk. I was venting, I wrote. "I shouldn't have been so harsh, please let me explain the context." He finally responded at 2 a.m. "I'm staying at my brother's, I need time to think." That was it, no indication of when he'd be back, no acknowledgement of my apologies, nothing. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in that doorway. By morning, I'd convinced myself that once we talked in person, once I explained how the conversation had gotten out of hand, he'd understand. We'd have the difficult discussion we should have had months ago about our intimacy issues, and we'd work through this. But Ryan didn't come home Saturday, or Sunday. On Monday, he texted asking what nights I'd be out of the apartment that week. He wanted to collect some things. The clinical language terrified me more than if he'd sent paragraphs of anger. We arranged for me to stay at Lauren's Tuesday night. I spent the entire day at work unable to concentrate, checking my phone every 30 seconds for some sign that he was reconsidering, that he wanted to talk. Nothing. When I came home Wednesday morning, his absence was surgical. He'd taken his clothes, his toiletries, his laptop, his books, but he'd also removed every photograph that featured him. Our engagement photos that had been clustered on the bookshelf gone. The candid shot of us at his sister's wedding gone. He'd even taken the photo magnet from our trip to Nashville off the refrigerator. It was like he was erasing himself from my life systematically, methodically. There was a note on the kitchen counter, handwritten on a page torn from one of his notebooks. "I can't be with someone who has so little respect for me that she'd share intimate details of our relationship for entertainment. You didn't just hurt me, you humiliated me in front of your friends. I keep thinking about how they'll look at me differently now, how they'll never see me the same way. I thought we were partners. Partners protect each other's dignity, especially in private. I hope you find what you're looking for. I'm taking the rest of my stuff this weekend while you're at your mom's." The note didn't ask for a conversation, didn't leave room for explanation. It was final in a way that made my stomach drop. I called him immediately. Voicemail, texted, "Please, can we just talk face to face?" No response. His brother Josh, who I'd always gotten along with, answered when I called his phone. "He doesn't want to talk right now," Josh said, not unkindly. "Maybe give it some time. Can you just tell him I'm sorry, that I never meant for him to hear any of that?" There was a long pause. "That's kind of the problem though, isn't it? You meant to say it, you just didn't mean for him to find out." That hit me like a physical blow because Josh was right. I hadn't accidentally revealed anything. I'd deliberately, consciously chosen to share our private struggles for sympathy and validation. I spent the rest of that week in a fog. Went to work, came home, stared at my phone, hopping for contact. My friends were supportive, but I could tell they felt awkward. They'd witnessed the thing I'd said. They'd encouraged me to elaborate. Now they were trying to be there for me while also probably questioning their role in the disaster. By the weekend, when I went to my mom's as planned, I knew what I'd find when I got back. And I was right, Ryan had cleared out everything remaining. His furniture, his kitchen stuff, even the gaming console we'd technically bought together, but he'd used more. The apartment looked hollow, echoey. What I wasn't prepared for was the text from his sister Emma, who I'd also considered a friend. "I need you to understand how badly you hurt him." Ryan called me crying because the woman he planned to marry thinks he's terrible at something intimate and vulnerable, and told her friends about it like it was a joke. "He's been destroying himself wondering what else you say about him when he's not around. I know relationships are complicated, but what you did was cruel. Please don't contact him anymore, he needs space to heal." The word cruel stuck with me. I hadn't thought of it as cruel, thoughtless, yes. A mistake, absolutely. But cruel implied intention to harm, and that wasn't what I'd meant. Except, hadn't there been something satisfying about finally being honest about my disappointment? About having people validate my frustration instead of making me feel like I was being too demanding? I started second-guessing everything. Had I exaggerated that night? Made things sound worse than they were for effect? I remembered the laughs I'd got, how engaged everyone had been with my story. Here's what I haven't told anyone, the part that makes me look worse than the initial incident I'd complained about Ryan's sexual performance before that night. Not to all my friends, but to Lauren multiple times over several months. That girl's night wasn't some wine-fueled anomaly. It was an escalation of a pattern I'd already established. And it wasn't even accurate. Looking back without the filter of frustration, I could remember plenty of times when our physical relationship had been good, even great. Times when Ryan had been attentive and present. But I'd focused exclusively on the recent rough patch, the period where things had declined, and I'd presented that as the whole truth. The worst part? I'd known some of those friends would tell their partners. That's how friend groups work. Which meant I'd essentially ensured that multiple people in our social circle would know intimate, unflattering details about Ryan's performance. A week after he moved out, I ran into his friend Marcus at the grocery store. The look on his face when he saw me, this mixture of pity and disgust, told me he'd heard. And if Marcus knew, everyone knew. Ryan's pretty torn up, Marcus said, stopping his cart near mine. I've never seen him like this. I'm trying to apologize, I said. He won't talk to me, Marcus shook his head. What you said, man, I don't know how you come back from that. You told people he's bad in bed. That's like the one thing you never broadcast about a guy. It wasn't like that. The conversation got away from me and, did you say it or not? I didn't have an answer that would help. That's what I thought, Marcus said and walked away. I became hyper-aware of how people looked at me. At coffee shops, I imagined baristas who might know someone in our friend group judging me. At work, I wondered if my colleagues who'd met Ryan at company events had heard through some gossip chain. My mom, when I finally told her what happened, was disappointingly unsympathetic. You humiliated him publicly, she said. What did you expect? Men's egos are fragile around that stuff and you took a sledgehammer to his. But our sex life was bad, I protested. Was I just supposed to never talk about it? With him, yes. With a therapist, sure. Not with a group of friends at a party. Everyone seemed to agree on this point. My sister, my dad, even Lauren eventually admitted that maybe the setting hadn't been appropriate. But what nobody seemed to understand was how lonely I'd been in that relationship, dealing with intimacy problems, while Ryan refused to acknowledge there was an issue. How was I supposed to cope with that without confiding in anyone? 2 weeks after he moved out, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Ryan from a new phone number. I'm keeping the engagement ring. Returning it felt like admitting I wanted this to work out and I can't. I'm also going to need you to handle canceling the wedding venue and photographer since they're in your name. I'll pay my half of the deposits we'll lose. My lawyer will be in touch about the apartment lease. Lawyer. The word made everything real in a new way. I tried calling the number. Blocked, texted, please don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. The message showed as delivered but never read. That's when I started spiraling. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my mind racing through every conversation we'd ever had, looking for signs I'd missed. I stopped eating regularly. Lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks. My work performance slipped noticeably enough that my boss pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. I became obsessed with social media, checking Ryan's accounts constantly even though he'd blocked me. I made a fake Instagram account just to see his stories. Pathetic, I know. He'd posted a photo at a brewery with friends looking happy. The caption was a quote about growth coming from difficult transitions. The comments were supportive. You deserve better, man. Proud of you for choosing yourself. Nobody mentioned me specifically, but I knew they were all thinking about what I'd done. I made the mistake of posting my own photo a few days later, trying to look happy and unbothered at brunch with Lauren. Within an hour, Becca had texted me maybe lay low on social media for a bit. People are talking. What are they saying? I asked. Just maybe wait a while. I ignored her advice and checked Facebook. Someone had created a vague post in a large local group. PSA: think twice before you trust your partner. They might be trashing you to their friends while smiling to your face. It had 73 comments, mostly people sharing their own stories of betrayal. I had no proof it was about me, but the timing was suspicious. My friends started treating me differently. Still supportive, but carefully so, like they were worried I might repeat their confidences too. Morgan stopped sharing details about her marriage problems, which she'd always done freely before. When I asked if her husband had found a new job, she gave me a vague answer and changed the subject. I realized with sick certainty that I'd damaged my credibility in my entire social circle. If I couldn't be trusted to keep my fiancé's confidence, whose could I keep? A month after Ryan left, his mother called me. I almost didn't answer. We'd never been particularly close, but I was desperate for any connection to him. I'm calling to ask you to please stop trying to contact Ryan through his friends and family, she said, her voice cold. Emma told me you messaged her asking her to convince him to talk to you. That's not appropriate. You've done enough damage. I just want to explain. Explain what? That you didn't mean for him to hear you mock him, that you only intended to humiliate him behind his back, not to his face. The contempt in her voice made me cry. It wasn't mocking. I was frustrated and I vented inappropriately. We were having real problems that he wouldn't address. So you addressed them with your friends instead of with him. I tried to talk to him, he shut me down every time. Then you should have insisted on counseling, or left, not stayed and collected ammunition to use against him at parties. That word ammunition, it implied premeditation I didn't think I'd had, but had I? Had I been subconsciously gathering evidence for some tribunal where I'd prove that I was the reasonable one and Ryan was the problem? He's my son, his mother continued. I've watched him go through a lot, but I've never seen him this hurt. He's questioning everything about himself now. So I'm asking you, mother to potential future mother, please let him move on. Don't contact him, don't contact his family. Give him that much respect, even if you couldn't give it to him when you were together. She hung up before I could respond. I spent that night drinking wine alone in the apartment that still felt like hours, even though all evidence of Ryan had vanished. I pulled up our text history and scrolled back through 4 years of messages. The early flirty exchanges, the inside jokes that developed, the mundane, what do you want for dinner logistics of building a life together. There was a message from 6 months into our relationship. I've never felt this comfortable with someone. Like I can be completely myself and you'll still think I'm enough. I screenshotted it at the time because it made me feel so loved. Now it felt like an indictment. He trusted me with his vulnerability, and I'd betrayed it in the most public way possible. But I was also angry. Angry that he'd shut down every attempt at honest conversation about our intimacy problems. Angry that he'd made me feel unreasonable for having needs. Angry that I'd been expected to protect his ego while my own dissatisfaction went unaddressed. Couldn't both things be true? That I'd handled it badly and that he'd contributed to the problem. I tried explaining this to Lauren over coffee. I know what I did was wrong, but it's not like our sex life was fine and I just randomly decided to trash him. There were real issues he refused to work on. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Can I be honest with you, please? I think you're looking for permission to feel like the victim here, and that's not quite right. Yeah, you guys had problems, but the way you talked about him that night, it wasn't just venting, it was mean. You were getting laughs at his expense and you enjoyed it. I saw your face. That observation hurt more than anything Ryan's family had said because Lauren had been there. She'd watched it happen in real time. You could have said we're having some intimacy issues and I'm frustrated, she continued. Instead you rated him numerically and gave specific examples designed to make him sound pathetic. There's a difference. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. Do you know what he told Josh? Lauren asked. He said the worst part wasn't even what you said, it was that you seemed happy saying it, like you'd been waiting for an opportunity. I felt sick, because that was uncomfortably accurate. I had been waiting, accumulating grievances, ready to unload them when the right moment presented itself. Around this time I started therapy. I'd resisted it before, telling myself I didn't need professional help for relationship problems. But now I was alone, publicly shamed and spiraling badly enough that even I recognized I needed intervention. My therapist, Dr. Williams, asked me to describe what happened without editorializing, just the facts. When I finished, she asked, "Why do you think you chose that moment to be honest about your dissatisfaction?" I was drunk and the card game prompted it. But you'd had opportunities before. You could have been honest in private conversations with Ryan, insisted on counseling, or ended the relationship if you were that unhappy. Why was it easier to be honest with your friends than with him? I didn't have a good answer. Over several sessions, we unpacked something uncomfortable I'd wanted Ryan to hear it secondhand. Not consciously, maybe, but some part of me had hoped word would get back to him, because I couldn't figure out how to make him understand how serious the problem was. If he wouldn't listen to me directly, maybe he'd listen to the social consequences of ignoring my needs. So you weaponized social pressure, Dr. Williams said neutrally. I never thought of it that way, but yes. I'd weaponized his reputation to force a conversation he'd been avoiding. The problem was the weapon had destroyed everything it was supposed to save. The thing about public humiliation, Dr. Williams explained, is that it doesn't create intimacy. It creates defensiveness and distance. Even if Ryan had been willing to work on your intimacy issues before, he definitely won't now. You've made the problem about his inadequacy rather than about the relationship dynamic. She was right. Whatever chance we'd had to fix things, I'd obliterated it by making him the punchline of my frustration. 3 months after he moved out, I got an email from Ryan, formal, detached, about logistics. He'd found someone to take over his half of the lease. He transferred his portion of the deposit we'd lose on the wedding venue. He divided our shared Spotify playlists and subscription services. Everything itemized and settled. At the bottom, I've thought a lot about what happened. I accept that I wasn't meeting your needs and that I should have taken your concerns more seriously when you raised them privately. But what you did, sharing intimate details of our relationship for entertainment, showed a fundamental lack of respect that I can't get past. I hope you find someone who satisfies you in all the ways I apparently didn't. Please don't contact me again. The email was kind, even generous in its partial acceptance of responsibility, which somehow made it worse. He was being the bigger person, acknowledging his contribution to our problems while maintaining his boundary. I wanted to respond, to explain one more time that I hadn't meant it as entertainment, that I'd been genuinely struggling and didn't know how to cope. But what would that accomplish? He'd asked me not to contact him. The least I could do, the only thing I could do was respect that, so I didn't reply. The months that followed were strange. I stayed in our apartment alone, eventually getting a roommate to afford it. I continued therapy. I became more careful about what I shared with friends, hyper-aware of the boundaries I'd violated. I went on a few dates, but I couldn't get comfortable. Every time conversation turned toward relationship history, I'd panic. How do you explain that your last relationship ended because you publicly humiliated your fiancé? When do you disclose that? First date? Fifth, never. I tried being vague. We had communication issues that came to a head. But vague answers invite questions, and I couldn't handle the follow-up without either lying or revealing the shameful truth. 6 months after the breakup, I ran into Ryan at a wedding we'd both been invited to before the split. I'd considered not going, but the couple were my friends first, and I didn't want to miss their day. Ryan brought a date, a petite brunette named Sophie who seemed genuinely nice when I awkwardly introduced myself during cocktail hour. He was cordial, polite, completely emotionally neutral. We made small talk about work and the weather like distant acquaintances, not people who'd planned to legally bind their lives together. The way he looked at me, or rather didn't look at me, kept his gaze politely unfocused over my shoulder, told me everything. I wasn't someone he hated. I was someone he'd moved past entirely. Later that night, I saw them dancing. He was laughing at something she said, his hand on the small of her back. He looked lighter than I'd seen him in the final year of our relationship. I left early, cried in my car for 20 minutes, then drove home. That's when I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just Ryan specifically, but the version of myself who'd been capable of partnership without sabotage. I'd proved to myself that when things got difficult, my instinct was to seek validation from others rather than doing the hard work of direct communication. My therapist asked if I'd do anything differently if I could go back. The obvious answer was don't have that conversation at girls' night. But the honest answer was more complicated. I'd do everything differently. I'd insist on couples therapy the first time Ryan dismissed my concerns. I'd be more direct about my needs instead of letting resentment build. I'd recognize when I was turning my friends into an echo chamber that validated my grievances rather than challenged me to communicate better. And if none of that worked, if we still couldn't fix our intimacy issues, I'd have left with dignity instead of burning everything down on my way out. A year after the breakup, I heard through mutual friends that Ryan and Sophie were moving in together. The news hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted him back. Enough time had passed that I could recognize we weren't right for each other. But because it confirmed that I was the problem in our relationship's final chapter, not him. He'd moved on, found someone new, was building something healthy. I was still trying to forgive myself for weaponizing intimacy against someone I'd claimed to love. Here's what I know now: privacy in relationships isn't about keeping secrets. It's about protecting the vulnerable parts of your partner that they've trusted you with. When Ryan struggled with our physical intimacy, he was already aware something was off. He didn't need me announcing it to an audience. My frustration was valid. My needs were valid, but the way I expressed them, by making him the punchline of my disappointment, was indefensible. People ask if I regret what I said. I regret how I said it, where I said it, and why I said it. But I don't regret that the relationship ended, because the resentment I'd built up had poisoned it beyond repair anyway. My betrayal just accelerated the inevitable collapse. I'm telling this story now because I saw a similar post in an online forum, someone asking if it's okay to vent about relationship problems to friends. The comments were divided. Half said healthy relationships include having outside support systems where you can discuss struggles. Half said some things should stay private between partners. Both are right, which is what makes it complicated. You can discuss relationship struggles with trusted friends without humiliating your partner. You can seek support without sharing specific, identifying details designed to get laughs. You can be honest about your dissatisfaction without rating your partner's sexual performance numerically at a party. I didn't understand those distinctions when I needed to. I told myself I was just being honest, just venting, just seeking support. But honesty without discretion is cruelty. Venting without boundaries is betrayal. And seeking support by sacrificing someone else's dignity is manipulation. Ryan's not a bad person. He wasn't even bad in bed objectively. We just weren't compatible in that area and he struggled to address it. But I made him into a villain in my own story because it was easier than accepting that sometimes relationships fail without anyone being definitively wrong. I'm different now, more careful, more aware of the weight my words carry. more willing to have difficult conversations directly instead of outsourcing them to friends who will tell me what I want to hear. But I also know that I damaged something in myself that night beyond just my relationship. I damaged my own integrity, and that's harder to rebuild than any romantic partnership. So yes, I said my fiancé was bad in bed during girls' night. He overheard and moved out that weekend. And everyone who thinks I'm terrible for doing it is probably right. But maybe knowing why I did it, understanding the full context of accumulated frustration and failed communication, makes it a little more complicated than just a villain destroying a good man for entertainment. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe some betrayals are inexcusable regardless of context. That's for you to decide. All I know is that I'd give anything to go back to that Friday night and choose differently. To leave the party when I got uncomfortable with the question. To protect Ryan's vulnerability the way he'd always protected mine. To be worthy of the trust he'd placed in me. But I can't go back. I can only move forward, carrying the lesson with me. Some words once spoken can never be unheard. Some damage once done can never be repaired. And some prices for temporary validation are far too high to ever be worth paying.